You're taking from one valid program in order to go to the other. And I think that is wrong. And that's why I believe it's ill-founded. We're not going to take it from DPS. We're not going to take it from all of these other strategies. But if I got two kids, I love them both. And I'm not going to pick and choose. Solomon didn't do it, and neither should the legislature.
Anyone else wishing to speak on, for, or against the amendment to the amendment? Seeing none, Chair recognizes Representative Spitzer to close.
I move for adoption.
Question occurs on the adoption of the Spitzer amendment to the amendment. Is there any objection? Chair is none. The amendment is... There is objection, members. It's a record vote. Clerk will please ring the bell. Show Mr. Spitzer voting aye and Mr. Turner Harris voting no. Show Mr. Coleman and Mr. Dutton and Mr. Miles all voting no. Have all members voted? Mr. Patty voting aye, Mr. Parker voting aye. Have all members voted? Mr. Keffer voting aye. Mrs. Burkett voting aye. Have all members voted? There being 93 ayes, 51 nays, the amendment is adopted. Following amendment to the amendment, the clerk will please read the amendment.
Amendment by Dutton.
Chair recognizes Mr. Dutton to explain his amendment.
Mr. Speaker, members, this is a silly amendment because this is a silly amendment it's amending.
Chair recognizes Mr. Spitzer in opposition to the amendment.
I move to table.
Chair recognizes Mr. Spitzer has moved to table. Chair recognizes Mr. Dutton to close.
Mr. Speaker, members, what this amendment does is it says that the money is going to follow the problem. And apparently Mr. Spitzer has a problem in his district.
Mr. Dutton offers up an amendment to the amendment. Mr. Spitzer has moved to table that amendment. Question is on the motion to table. There's a record vote. Clerk will please ring the bell. Show Mr. Spitzer voting aye, Mr. Dutton voting no. Show Mr. Leach voting aye, Mr. Patty voting aye, Mr. Price voting aye, Mr. Garnett Coleman voting no. Have all members voted? Have all members voted? There being 95 ayes and 47 nays, the motion to table prevails. Members, we have resolved all the amendments to the amendment. Is there anyone wishing to speak on, for, or against the Spitzer amendment as amended? Mr. Turner?
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to ask the author of the amendment a couple of questions when he's back at the microphone.
Seeing no one to speak other than Mr. Spitzer, the chair recognizes Mr. Spitzer to close on his amendment as amended. Mr. Turner?
Would the gentleman yield for some questions?
Gentleman yield for questions?
I will yield for questions.
Gentleman yields.
Thank you, Representative. So as amended, your amendment is going to put an additional, how many $1 million into abstinence only?
$3 million over the biennium.
$3 million over the biennium, okay. Did you know that Texas has received more federal abstinence-only funding than any other state in the country?
I was unaware of that.
Okay. It's true. And did you know that we also have concurrently the nation's 5th highest teen birth rate?
I don't, as a physician, I see that a lot, and I don't doubt that for a second.
Okay. And did you also know that Texas has the single highest repeat teen birth rate?
I was unaware of that, but again, not surprised.
Okay. Did you know that the state of California, which did not participate in the federal abstinence-only funding program, and actually bars abstinence-only education in its public schools, has a teen birth rate that's nearly half the rate of the state of Texas?
No.
Knowing those facts now, do you see why some of us, myself included, question the wisdom of putting more money into an abstinence-only program, which is concurrent with us having skyrocketing teen birth rates, repeat teen birth rates, and is proving by any objective measure to be ineffective?
I disagree. I think abstinence is the, as a physician, I can tell you that abstinence is the only 100% perfect method of birth control.
Oh, I agree with that.
It's also impossible to get a sexually transmitted disease without sex.
I completely agree with that, but in the light of the fact that we have one of the highest teen birth rates, highest repeat teen birth rate, objectively, can you say that abstinence only is working when we're getting more money for it than any state in the country?
It may not be working well, but to say it's not working, to say that continuing to move more money, I mean, abstinence education is HIV prevention. They're essentially the same thing. I'm moving money from one place to the other, but they're accomplishing the same goal, which is to keep people from getting HIV. Unwanted pregnancy is another one of those issues, then that's a good byproduct.
Well, I would agree with you that it's not working well. Thank you.
Mr. Dutton, for a purpose. Will the gentleman yield? Spitzer,
The gentleman will yield for a question.
Gentleman yields. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you. What do you know what the stats are on your district in regards to this measure?
We have too many STDs and we have too many unplanned pregnancies.
And do they teach abstinence now?
There is not much sexual education that goes on in the schools. There's some, but it's not enough.
And
to that effect, my wife and I both volunteer in the school to do education about sex, and some of that is abstinence education.
And you teach abstinence, I suppose?
We do teach abstinence education, yes.
Okay.
I mean, the school's perfectly open to teach whatever they want, but when we come in, that's what we teach.
I understand.
That's what we believe, and she's a physician also.
Well, what I'm trying to get at is, I wonder what we can expect, or what we should expect, if now we're going to put this kind of money into abstinence teaching.
Well, if we expect poorly out of children, we will get poorly. If we don't hold them to a higher standard, we will get that. And so I think teaching and abstinence education, we shoot for a higher standard, and if some fail, then some fail, but at least we shot for the higher standard, and some will succeed, and they will succeed mightily, and I think we should support that.
Were you taught abstinence?
Yes, I was.
And did it work?
It did. I was a virgin the day I got married at age 29. I've had sex with one woman in my life, and that's my wife. And I would hope that for other people. Thank you for asking.
Well, I just wondered, but perhaps that's why you believe what you believe, and I
think that's a lot of why that I was able to go to school and do other things, is that my parents did teach me that and establish that in me, and I hope to be able to establish that in other children so they can do the same thing, so maybe they can be here someday as a state representative, as a physician, and as a man who is taking care of his family.
And so you believe that what was good for you is good for everybody else?
I believe what's good for me is good for a lot of people, and so it certainly worked with me. And I'm certainly going to try it with my children. And I'm going to tell them at least 25 more times to please do abstinence and to do whatever it is that is taught in the STD prevention. Because I think that's what's going to work for them. It's what worked for me. And again, if you hold people to a high standard, sometimes you get it.
Well, I know, and sometimes you don't. As you suggested in your district, apparently that is not working, at least to the best that you'd like for it to be.
I haven't got to talk to everybody yet. But
the people you have talked to, I mean, do you have any evidence that they have succeeded in waiting until 29 and they've only had sex with one woman?
I have some. Just a few weeks ago, we had a nice little...
Well, now, since you brought it up, was that the first woman you asked?
I'm sorry?
I just wanted to know if that was the first woman you asked.
The first woman I asked?
Yes.
I'm not sure that's a real appropriate
Well,
question.
you brought
That's
it
the
up.
first
You
one
said you started telling me about you had sex with only
The House will
one
come to
woman.
order.
You started to tell me about you had only sex with one woman,
That is correct.
and that you were 29 when that happened.
That is correct.
And I asked, my question was...
The House will come to order. Ms. Collier, for what purpose?
Will the gentleman yield for a question?
I'll yield for a question.
I would like for his comments to be written in the journal, but I do have a question because I want to make sure that we're providing medically accurate information. Earlier, you stated that you cannot get STDs without sex. Is that what you?
You can get, well, it depends on what your definition of is and what your definition of sex is. So without the...
There's a federal website.
I mean, I can go through all this if you want to, as far as how you get HPV, how you get
well, according to a federal
other
website,
diseases, but I'm not sure that's something that you want to go into in this
because
particular
you're
forum.
talking about removing. You're talking about removing funding for programs for HIV and STDs.
I'm talking about shifting funding from one place that talks about decreasing the chance of HIV and sexually transmitted disease to another place that can prevent
But I
sexually
want to make sure
transmitted
that
disease and HIV.
you understand fully, because if you still think that you cannot get an STD without having sex, then maybe we need to educate you on how you can get an STD, because you can get genital herpes and warts without having sex.
You can. It's awful hard through your clothes. So I mean, again, we can talk about this kind of stuff, but you have to have skin-to-skin contact.
Representative
I'm not sure that's
Yes,
the
Turner
appropriate
raises a
podcast.
point of order. The gentleman's time's expired. Point of order is well taken and sustained. Mr. Wally, for what purpose?
Can we reduce the comments, all the comments on this amendment and all the rest of the amendments reduced to writing and placed in the journal, please?
There's objection to the, there is objection. Members, we're on Mr. Spitzer's amendment. Question is on the adoption of the amendment. To record vote. Clerk, ring the bell. Show Mr. Spitzer voting aye. Show Mr. Price voting aye. Mr. Coleman voting no. Have all members voted? Being 97 ayes and 47 nays, the amendment is adopted. Members, we're on page 105. The following amendment, the clerk will read the amendment.